Welcome, dear listener, to Whispers of the Night, a gentle corner of the world where stories unfold softly, carrying you toward calm, rest, and quiet dreams. Before we begin, I invite you to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that every evening we can share a little warmth, a little magic, and a little peace with you. Tonight, we invite you to pour yourself a warm cup of tea, allowing the soft aroma to fill your senses. Feel the warmth in your hands, the comforting weight of the cup, and the tiny steam rising in delicate swirls. This story is about Lina, a thoughtful little girl who loves the quiet moments of life, who notices the smallest wonders, and who, one evening, discovers something extraordinary. As Lina lifts her teacup, she sees tiny ripples shimmering like sunlight across a miniature ocean. She leans closer, her eyes wide with curiosity, and senses a gentle whisper, soft and inviting, as if the waves themselves are speaking to her. These whispers carry stories from distant shores, tales of calm waters, playful tides, and golden sunsets. In this story, you will drift alongside Lina, feeling the warmth of the teacup, listening to its whispers, and letting your imagination roam through tiny waves, gentle storms, and sparkling horizons. Let yourself be present in this moment, breathing slowly, feeling the soft weight of calm settle around your shoulders. Together, we will explore the ocean in a teacup, a story of wonder, reflection, and the quiet magic hidden in the ordinary. Take a slow, deep breath now, and let the journey begin. Now, as you sink a little deeper into your chair or bed, allow your body to release tension, one gentle sigh at a time. Picture Lina sitting quietly by her window, her long hair cascading over her shoulders, softly illuminated by the glow of a flickering candle. In her hands, she holds a warm teacup, the steam rising in gentle spirals, carrying the subtle aroma of her favorite tea dot. As she peers into the cup, the surface begins to shimmer, shifting and swirling. Tiny ripples move like sunlight, dancing across a small, delicate ocean. With every subtle wave, Lina feels drawn in, as if the cup itself is breathing, whispering, and calling to her. Soft whispers rise from the water, carrying stories from distant shores. Waves lap gently, rhythmically, like a lullaby, inviting Lina to remember, to dream, and to feel deeply. She leans closer, inhaling the faint scent of the sea, imagining the wind brushing her cheeks, the warmth of sand beneath her feet, the gentle pull of tides. The teacup becomes a mirror, reflecting not only water, but memories. Lina recalls quiet walks on sandy shores, the laughter of waves chasing her footsteps, golden sunsets stretching across the horizon. Each ripple seems to hold a memory. Each shimmer carries a gentle lesson. She lets her fingers brush the cup's edge, feeling a connection that is both intimate and infinite. Now, tiny clouds appear over the miniature ocean. A gentle storm begins, with swirls and small churning waves. Lina watches, unafraid, learning to breathe through the turbulence, feeling the rise and fall of the waves echo in her own chest. Slowly, the storm passes, leaving behind a calm, glimmering sea, peaceful and quiet above the teacup. Lina notices the sky reflected in the water, the soft gold of sunset, silver moonlight, and the first sparkling stars appearing like diamonds across a gentle night sky. She swirls the tea slowly, imagining herself gliding across oceans, floating beneath the same sky reflected in her cup, feeling the vastness of the universe held within her tiny hands. Every sip she imagines holds infinite stories. Every ripple carries soft whispers of wonder, calm, and reflection. Let yourself drift with Lina now, carried on the gentle waves, lulled by the whispers, and feel your thoughts settle like soft sand at the bottom of a quiet, still sea. Breathe in peace and breathe out tension, and know that in this moment, all is calm, all is safe, and all is gently, beautifully still. The ocean in a teacup ripples on porcelain. Lina sat by the window, the soft morning light spilling across her small room and scattering like gold dust on the wooden floor. She cradled a delicate porcelain teacup in her hands, the warmth seeping through her fingers and spreading like a gentle tide into her chest. Outside, the world was slowly waking. Trees swayed in the light breeze, their leaves shimmering with dew, and somewhere in the distance, a sparrow chirped a tentative song. But inside, the room was quiet, a sanctuary of stillness where time seemed to slow, folding in upon itself like the curling steam rising from her cup. She held the cup close and peered inside. The surface of the tea, a deep amber, caught the sunlight, and for a fleeting moment it looked like liquid fire, glowing softly and warmly. Then she noticed the ripples, tiny, concentric circles moving across the surface, each one shifting and overlapping, reflecting the light in 1,000 subtle ways. They reminded her of waves, but not the kind she had seen in the sea. These were smaller, gentler, and somehow alive. Lina leaned closer, her nose almost touching the rim, and her breath created faint clouds of warmth that mingled with the aroma of chamomile and honey. The scent was soothing, familiar, and yet it seemed to carry something more, something she couldn't quite name. There was a rhythm to the ripples, as if the tea itself were breathing, whispering secrets she had never heard before. She felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to trace them with her finger, though she knew the porcelain was too delicate to touch, too roughly. Her eyes followed the movement, slow and hypnotic. The ripples overlapped and danced, creating patterns that seemed deliberate, almost intentional, as if the tiny waves were trying to communicate. Lina's heart lifted with a mixture of wonder and joy. She had always been a quiet girl, the sort to notice small things others overlooked, the way sunlight pooled in the curve of a teapot, the gentle sway of a curtain as a breeze passed through. And yet, She had never felt the world respond so vividly to her presence before. Could there really be an ocean in this little cup? She whispered to herself, a soft breath barely stirring the steam. She smiled at the thought, and the idea made her pulse quicken with excitement. The notion was absurd, of course, yet not impossible. After all, what was life if not a collection of small miracles waiting to be noticed? Perhaps oceans could exist anywhere, not just in vast, endless stretches of water, but in tiny, overlooked places as well. She lifted the cup closer to her lips, inhaling the warm scent, letting it fill her senses. She took a slow sip, feeling the liquid slide smoothly down her throat, leaving a warmth that seemed to extend beyond her body, as though the tea itself were gently unfolding, connecting her to something larger, something infinite. The ripples continued to shift, now catching the light in a way that made her blink in surprise. They glimmered like tiny golden threads, weaving an intricate tapestry on the surface, each circle overlapping the other, each wave a story in itself. Lina let her mind wander, her thoughts drifting as freely as the ripples. She imagined herself standing on a vast, windswept beach, the sand soft beneath her feet, the sea stretching endlessly before her. She could hear the waves crashing, one after another, each carrying a song of distant lands and unseen creatures. And yet, in this small cup, she could feel the same sense of immensity, the same quiet majesty. The ordinary had become extraordinary, and she realized that magic often lived in these fleeting, unnoticed moments, waiting for someone patient enough to see it. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old books, a scent that mingled with the tea, creating a cocoon of calm. Lina's eyes traced the ripples again. She noticed tiny points of reflection, where sunlight struck the liquid at just the right angle. They looked like stars scattered across a miniature sky, and for a heartbeat, she could almost believe she was gazing into the universe itself. Each ripple was a planet, each glimmering point a constellation, and the cup was a cosmos contained within porcelain. Her fingers tightened around the handle, grounding her to the here and now, yet her mind continued to drift across the imaginary oceans she saw in the tea. She imagined waves curling higher and higher, crashing into invisible cliffs, sending sprays of foam that shimmered like liquid diamonds. She thought of the creatures that might dwell in this tiny world, tiny fish with scales of molten gold, delicate seaweed swaying with the current, and perhaps even a small, curious octopus peeking from behind a rock. Everything was possible here, in this small, quiet universe she held so gently. A breeze stirred the curtains, soft and tentative, and Lina shivered with delight. It reminded her of the wind on a real beach, salty and alive, carrying the scent of distant seas. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining her hair whipping around her face as she leaned into the wind, feeling the ocean spray on her cheeks. And yet the warmth of the teacup remained a tether to her quiet room. It was strange and beautiful how both worlds could exist at once, both vast and intimate, contained and infinite. Lina's gaze returned to the ripples, noticing how they responded to the smallest movements, the tilt of her hand. the faint vibration from her heartbeat. Each ripple seemed alive, sensitive to her presence. She wondered how many people passed through the world without noticing such things, unaware that even the smallest gesture could stir life in invisible ways. She felt a quiet gratitude for her own attentiveness, a recognition of the unique way she experienced the world. She took another sip, slower this time, savoring the taste and the warmth. The tea was a comfort, yes, but it was also a portal, a bridge between what was real and what was imagined. Lina imagined herself diving into the cup, shrinking until she could walk on the surface, exploring the tiny ocean she had discovered. She imagined riding the ripples as if they were gentle waves, the porcelain rim forming cliffs and valleys that she navigated carefully, her toes skimming the liquid, leaving trails that would disappear almost as quickly as they were made. The sunlight shifted slightly, and the ripples seemed to dance differently now, catching the new angle and throwing sparks of light across her eyes. Lina laughed softly, a sound that was carried away by the breeze, mixing with the faint chirping of the sparrow outside. The tea felt alive, a mirror for her own curiosity and imagination. It was a reminder that magic was not always loud or grand. Sometimes it was quiet, subtle, and waiting in the smallest corners of everyday life. Her eyes wandered to the steam rising from the cup. It twisted and curled like wisps of smoke from a tiny bonfire, delicate tendrils moving as if they had minds of their own. Lina watched them dance, imagining that they carried messages from distant oceans, whispers from places she would never visit but could dream of in vivid detail. She thought of the tides, the currents, the hidden worlds beneath, and how much of it could be reflected in something as simple as a teacup. For a long while, Lina simply watched and breathed, letting the quiet settle deep within her chest. She felt her heart slow, matching the rhythm of the ripples, and her mind emptied of the usual chatter. The ordinary act of drinking tea had become a meditation, a connection to something greater, something immeasurably beautiful. She realized that in those small moments, she felt more alive than in any grand adventure, more attuned than in any bustling city street. Finally, she whispered again, almost to herself, "Could there really be an ocean in this little cup?" Her voice was soft, gentle, carrying the weight of wonder and the thrill of discovery. She held the cup closer, letting the warmth seep into her fingers, and stared at the ripples once more, knowing that the answer didn't matter. What mattered was the seeing, the noticing, the way her mind and heart had opened to something extraordinary hiding in plain sight. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves again, and Lina imagined the tiny waves in her cup responding in kind, a miniature tide dancing in harmony with the world beyond her window. She smiled, letting the thought linger, and felt a quiet joy that was simple and profound. Somewhere in the depths of the teacup, in the gentle undulation of the liquid and the glimmering play of light, she knew there was a secret world, and she had been granted the rare privilege of witnessing it. The ripples slowed, merging into a still, gleaming surface. Lina set the cup down gently on the windowsill and rested her forehead against the edge, letting the warmth linger. The sunlight glinted off the tea, a final sparkling wink, and Lina felt as though the ocean itself had blinked at her, sharing a secret she would carry forever. In that quiet morning light, she realized that magic did not always announce itself with grandeur. Sometimes it whispered, small and patient, waiting for someone with the heart to notice. And with a soft smile, Lina whispered once more, letting the words float on the warm air like tiny paper boats. Could there really be an ocean in this little cup? The whisper of waves. Lina sat again by the window the following morning, the same porcelain cup cradled carefully between her palms. The steam curled upward, soft and dreamlike, catching the sunlight. She had not slept much the night before. Her mind had been too full of questions. She had replayed the moment again and again, the ripples, the way they had glimmered as though an ocean lived within the amber surface, the way her own voice had sounded when she whispered her wonder aloud. She could not let it go now. As she lifted the cup, she felt something different. Not just the familiar warmth pressing against her skin, not just the fragrant blend of chamomile and honey she had steeped with care. There was a hum, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration, like the gentle echo of something far away. She tilted her head, listening, wondering if she had imagined it. But the sound lingered, soft as a breath, a whisper no louder than the rustle of leaves outside her window. She drew the cup closer. At first, it was only the faint, ringing silence of mourning the distant bird calls, the sigh of wind through branches, the far-off hum of life beyond her little home. But then, beneath all that, she heard it, a low, fluid murmur. It reminded her of seashells she used to hold to her ear as a child, convinced she could hear the sea trapped inside them. Only this was clearer, gentler, as though an entire shore had been folded neatly into her tea. The whispers rose and fell like waves, never loud, never insistent, but steady, patient. Her breath caught as she realized she was not imagining it. The sound was real, or, at least, it felt real enough. She leaned closer, cupping the porcelain with both hands, pressing her ear to the rim as carefully as if she might disturb the balance of whatever world lay within. The tea shifted, tiny ripples trembling across its surface, and with them came flickering images. They appeared not with the sharp clarity of real life, but as faint reflections, like memories floating just beneath the water. She saw a horizon drawn in light, waves tipped with silver, a stretch of sky that melted seamlessly into sea. She blinked, and the vision dissolved, returning the cup to its quiet amber glow. Yet the sound remained the ebb and flow of whispered tides, as if the ocean had found its way into her hands. Lina's chest tightened with wonder. She felt her own pulse echoing the rhythm, her breath unconsciously falling into sync with the rise and fall of the whispers. She could not tell if the sounds were carried from within the tea itself or from her own imagination, but either way, it no longer mattered. The connection was undeniable. She felt as though the cup had become a doorway, a fragile vessel linking her small, still room to something boundless and eternal. She closed her eyes briefly, trying to steady herself, then opened them again, gazing into the tea as if it might reveal its secrets. The liquid quivered slightly as she tilted it, and once again, light caught on its surface. This time, the glimmers stretched into lines, then into curves, forming fleeting images of waves curling against unseen shores. She gasped softly. The pictures lasted only moments before dissolving back into ripples, but they were enough to make her heart race. Her fingers tightened around the cup. She leaned closer, her breath shallow, her eyes wide with a childlike wonder she had almost forgotten. The whispers were clearer now, not words exactly, but a language older and softer, a rhythm that spoke to her body more than her mind. She thought of the vast oceans she had read about in books, their depths filled with secrets, their horizons endless. And here, somehow, she felt those same mysteries rising to greet her from something so small, so ordinary as a cup of tea. She pressed the porcelain against her chest, letting the warmth sink deeper into her. The whispers shifted, as if responding to her touch. A faint image flickered again, sunlight breaking across waves, the water glimmering like liquid glass, carrying reflections of a distant dawn. She could almost feel the salt spray on her face, though the air around her remained still and familiar. Her heart slowed, her body softening into the rhythm. She let herself imagine what it would mean if every small thing contained something greater, if every teacup held an ocean, if every pebble contained a mountain, if every breath carried the weight of a storm. It was a comforting thought that the vastness of the world could be hidden inside something so fragile and near. Perhaps life itself was always this way, immense and infinite, waiting quietly in the folds of the ordinary. Her fingertips brushed the rim, and she thought she felt it tremble. The whispers deepened, a gentle hush that reminded her of waves curling on a shore at dusk. She closed her eyes again, surrendering to it, letting the sound wrap around her like a tide. In that moment, she was no longer a girl in a quiet room. She was part of something larger. She was standing barefoot at the edge of a great ocean, the water lapping gently at her toes, the horizon stretching endlessly before her. The sensation was vivid, so vivid she almost opened her eyes to confirm she was still sitting by the window. But she resisted. She wanted to stay in this suspended space where the world outside and the world within blurred together. She wanted to listen. The whispers spoke not in sentences, but in feelings, calm, vastness, serenity. They reminded her of the times she had stood beneath a night sky scattered with stars, when the immensity of the universe pressed gently against her chest until she could do nothing but breathe deeply and let it fill her. The sound in her cup was the same, a reminder of how small and yet how infinite she truly was. She wondered if others could hear it, if her grandfather, who had once collected teacups from across the world, had ever pressed his ear close and heard the whispers of distant seas, if the women in old stories who read fortunes in leaves and ripples had listened to oceans hidden in their cups as well. The thought made her smile. Perhaps she was not the first to discover it, but she felt, in this moment, that it was meant just for her. The light shifted through the window, warming the tea, and another image shimmered into being. She saw not just water this time, but a stretch of sand, golden and wet, glistening as waves withdrew. She could almost hear the crunch of tiny shells beneath bare feet, the soft hiss of foam retreating back into the sea. The image wavered, then dissolved, leaving her staring once more into the familiar amber liquid, but her heart swelled, for even the briefest glimpse had been enough to stir her imagination awake. Lina leaned in closer, her breath slowing. She held the cup as though it were fragile and infinite all at once, and listened. The whispers no longer felt foreign. They were becoming familiar, like the quiet voice of a friend she hadn't known she missed. She realized they were guiding her not to answers, not to explanations, but to peace. With every rise and fall, every soft echo of a wave, she felt her own restless thoughts settle. Worries she hadn't realized she carried dissolved like sugar in warm water, leaving only stillness. Her eyelids grew heavy, though she was not tired. It was the weight of calm, the gentle pull of a tide that carried her inward. She let her head tilt slightly, resting her cheek against the cup, and breathed deeply. The whispers grew softer, more tender, as if they sensed her surrender. She let them fill her, each wave washing over her mind, smoothing the edges of her thoughts until all that remained was quiet wonder, the world outside her. Window continued, birds darted through the sky, the wind brushed against the trees, but Lina was far away, cradled in the infinite sound of water moving in her hands. She felt her chest expand with gratitude, her lips curving into a smile. It no longer mattered if the ocean was truly there or if it lived only in her imagination. What mattered was the feeling, the way something so small had opened a doorway to something so vast. With a final, steady breath, Lina closed her eyes. She let the whispers guide her thoughts, carrying her across invisible horizons, through waves that shimmered like light itself. The teacup was warm against her palms, her anchor and her compass, and in that quiet space, she let herself drift, trusting the whispers to lead her wherever she was meant to go. Currents of memory. Lina sat with the teacup held gently in her palms, the warmth seeping into her fingers, the surface of the liquid glimmering as though sunlight had been folded into its depths. The soft whispers she had heard before seemed quieter now, not gone, but transformed into something deeper, like the low hum of a tide pressing against a distant shore. She leaned closer, gazing into the tiny ripples, and as she did, something shifted, not just in the tea, but in her heart. The patterns on the surface began to blur, to stretch, and suddenly she was not simply looking at water. She was looking into memory. The first image was faint, but unmistakable. She saw herself as a child, small and barefoot, standing on a sandy beach where the sky and sea blended in hazy blues. The sand clung to her ankles as waves rolled in, playful and untamed, curling at her feet before racing back. She remembered laughing, the sound so bright and high it almost startled her to hear it again. The memory came with texture, the cool grit of sand beneath her toes, the sharp sting of salt spray on her cheeks, the way the wind pushed her hair across her face until it tangled into wild strands. She blinked, and the vision flickered, but it returned, clearer. She was running now, chasing the retreating water as it drew back from the shore. daring to get close before it rushed in again. Her laughter echoed, blending with the cries of gulls overhead. Somewhere behind her, voices called out familiar, warm. She turned, and in the shifting tea, she saw the outline of her parents, their hands linked as they strolled slowly down the shoreline, keeping watch over their curious little girl who loved to dance with the waves. Her chest tightened at the sight. It had been years since she had been to the seaside with them, and yet here they were, alive again in the currents of memory. She could almost feel the reassuring weight of her mother's hand on her shoulder, the gentle guidance of her father's voice telling her not to wander too far. She remembered how safe she had felt in that moment, as though the sea itself was a playground built just for her. Endless and kind, the tea shimmered, and the scene shifted again. She was a little older now, standing with her brother at the water's edge. He had dared her to step deeper, and though she was afraid of the waves, she had followed him, both of them laughing as the water surged higher, soaking their shorts and clinging to their legs. She remembered the thrill of it, the way the ocean both frightened and thrilled her, the way her brother's laughter had given her courage. She could still hear it now, ringing through the whispers in her cup, as real as if he were sitting beside her. Lina's breath caught, her throat tightening with a mix of joy and sorrow. Time had taken those moments far from her, scattering them into the past, yet here they returned, whole and shimmering in the tiny ocean she held. She realized then that this was not just water, not just ripples. It was a mirror for her own soul, a vessel carrying not only the vastness of nature, but the depth of her own memories. She lifted the cup slightly, the light shifting across its surface. More scenes unfolded, each flowing into the next, like waves merging on a shore. She saw herself building sandcastles with small, clumsy hands, carefully pressing shells into the towers and moats, only to watch them collapse when the tide rolled in. At the time, she had cried, frustrated by the sea's indifference. Yet now, watching it replay in her tea, she smiled softly at the lesson she hadn't known. She was learning that beauty was often fleeting, that even when washed away, it lingered in memory. The whispers deepened, carrying her further still. She remembered evenings on the shore, when the sun dipped low and the world turned golden. She remembered sitting between her grandparents, wrapped in a blanket, watching the waves reflect the fire of the setting sky. Her grandmother's voice had been low and soothing, telling her stories of sailors and ships, of lighthouses standing watch through storms, of mermaids who lived in hidden coves. She remembered the way her grandfather would hum a tune without words that blended perfectly with the rhythm of the waves. The sound had lulled her to sleep more than once, her head resting on his shoulder as the sea whispered lullabies alongside him. Tears pricked Lina's eyes as she held the cup closer. The tea's warmth pressed into her chest, mingling with the ache of longing. She had not thought of these moments in years, and yet they rose now with such clarity she could almost step into them. She could almost feel the scratch of her grandmother's shawl against her cheek, the smell of her grandfather's pipe mingling with the salt air. The ocean in her teacup had become a tide, pulling her backward, carrying her gently into the arms of memory. Her breath came slow and steady. She let the images wash through her, not resisting the sorrow or the joy. Both were threads of the same tapestry, both woven into who she was. She realized that the ocean had always lived inside her, carrying her past as surely as it carried waves to shore. The tea was simply revealing it, drawing it forth in shimmering glimpses, reminding her that nothing was ever truly gone. She smiled faintly as another memory surfaced. She was sitting on the deck of a small boat, legs dangling over the side, watching the water churn beneath her as her father rowed. The sea had looked endless then, vast and unknowable, and she had asked where it ended. Her father had laughed, ruffling her hair, and told her that the ocean never truly ended. She had not understood then, but now, holding the teacup, she did. The sea was endless, not only in the world, but in her heart. It carried her stories, her family, her laughter. It was never lost, only transformed. The tea shifted again, its surface glowing faintly in the sunlight. Lina saw herself lying on the sand, staring up at the sky. She had been so young then, counting clouds as they drifted, listening to the hush of waves. The memory came with a sensation she had almost forgotten, the feeling of being small, and yet, in that smallness, being part of something infinite. She had felt then as if the sky and sea had folded her into their embrace, and the same feeling rose in her now, warm and comforting. Her lips curved into a smile, slow and soft. She realized that this was what the teacup was showing her, not just waves and horizons, but the truth that the sea had always been with her, shaping her in quiet ways. Each ripple in the cup carried a story, a laugh, a fragment of who she was. It was more than memory. It was continuity. It was belonging. The whispers grew softer, lulling, and Lina let her eyes close. She no longer needed to see the visions. She could feel them within her, the sand between her toes, the salt wind against her face, the warmth of her family's hands in hers. Each memory was a current, pulling her gently along, reminding her of where she had come from and who she still was. The teacup was warm against her skin, steady and sure, as if holding her together. She realized that she, too, was like the ocean, ever-changing, carrying tides of memory, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, but always vast, always alive. The thought filled her with both humility and comfort. She was small, yes, but within that smallness lived something infinite. A soft breath escaped her lips, and her smile lingered. She let the warmth of the tea and the rhythm of the whispers cradle her, letting the memories settle deep inside. She felt lighter now, as though the tides had carried away the weight she hadn't realized she was holding. And in that quiet, with the ocean of her childhood rippling gently in her hands, Lina smiled once, more softly, knowingly, feeling both small and infinite all at once. Storms and shadows. The ocean in Lina's teacup had always seemed like a calm and gentle place, a miniature sea that invited her to lose herself in its reflections. But on this quiet evening, as the room lay wrapped in the soft hush of twilight, something changed. She leaned over the teacup as she had done countless times before, and instead of serene ripples, she found the surface darkening. A sudden swirl appeared at the center, circling itself, spinning as though invisible winds had descended into its small universe. The water, once tranquil, grew restless. Dark clouds seemed to gather inside, shadows forming on the delicate porcelain walls, and tiny waves began to roll and crash as if the cup contained a storm of its own. Lina blinked in awe, unsure if her imagination had shaped the vision or if the cup truly carried something alive and untamed. Her breath caught for a moment, caught between fear and fascination. The sight reminded her of standing on real shorelines in the past, of days when the sky had turned heavy and winds howled across the beach. She could almost smell the salt of those memories again, could hear the rumbling thunder from her childhood storms echoing faintly in the air around her. The storm inside the teacup wasn't just water spinning it, carried with it something deeper, a reflection of emotions she often buried. The churning waves within the cup mirrored her own unsettled thoughts, the quiet worries that sometimes rose in her mind when she least expected them. As the storm inside grew more intense, she noticed her chest tightening, her heartbeat quickening, as though her body was reacting to the rhythm of the miniature sea. Her fingers tightened around the teacup's handle, and she realized how easy it was for something smaller thought, a memory, a worry, to become powerful, to expand and fill her whole being. She set the cup carefully down on the wooden table, yet her gaze stayed locked on it. The water rose and fell in chaotic bursts, clouds swirling above like charcoal smoke. It was both mesmerizing and unsettling. Lina leaned closer, resting her chin gently on her hands, trying to steady her breathing as she watched. There was awe in her eyes, but also a soft thread of worry. She whispered softly to herself, as though speaking to the storm, "It's all right. Let it pass." Her voice was nearly lost in the quiet of the room, yet it carried into the space as a small anchor, breathing slowly. She noticed how the storm in the cup seemed to respond. Each exhale of hers coincided with a slight easing of the waves, as if the rhythm of her breath carried across dimensions, soothing what was restless inside the tiny sea. Still, the storm did not vanish at once. Dark waters continued to twist, thunderheads formed in miniature skies, but she could feel a connection between her own patience and the cup's fury. The more she allowed herself to breathe deeply, the more she felt her body unclench, the more she realized that storms, whether within or beyond, did not demand resistance. They demanded presence. Her thoughts drifted to memories of standing by windows during childhood storms, her mother's hand resting gently on her shoulder. She remembered how the glass rattled with the wind, how lightning briefly painted the room with brilliance, and how fear in her young heart had slowly dissolved when she felt that hand steady, calm, unshaken. It was not that the storm had lessened in those moments, but that she had learned to share its presence without being swept away. Now, sitting before a swirling teacup, Lina felt the echo of that lesson. Storms were not always something to fight. Sometimes they simply asked for breath, for patience, for the knowledge that all storms, no matter how violent, pass eventually. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the soundless storm to continue without her gaze. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she could see waves rise, crash, and fall again. She could hear the hush of rain that was not truly falling, the rumble of thunder that existed only in the imagination. The storm inside the teacup had become a reflection of her own inner weather, the parts of her mind that grew unsettled, the thoughts that circled endlessly, the shadows that sometimes visited without invitation. She felt her chest rise with one long inhale, and as she let it go, she imagined the clouds, the winds quieting. When she opened her eyes again, the waves inside the cup were still rolling, but not as fiercely. A strange peace bloomed within her as she watched. She realized how much of life mirrored what the cup showed her. The world outside could be vast and unpredictable, filled with sudden turns, heavy days, and moments of chaos. But even within the smallest vessel, storms could be born, just as easily.com could return. And perhaps, she thought, that was the hidden truth. Life's storms, whether in oceans or teacups, were reminders that resilience was not about stopping the waves, but learning to float with them. A faint smile curved her lips as she placed one palm flat on the table, grounding herself. She let her mind drift through the many storms she had faced already, the ones that had come with school, when fear of failure loomed larger than her abilities, the ones that came with friendships and family, when words misunderstood had turned into silences longer than she had wished, the ones that rose in her own heart, quiet storms of self-doubt that whispered she was too small for the world, too fragile to stand steady. And yet she had endured each one. They had passed, sometimes leaving scars, sometimes leaving lessons, but never lasting forever. She looked again at the teacup. Its storm now appeared smaller, like a distant storm seen from the safety of a quiet bay. She reached out and lifted the cup gently again, holding it near her face. She whispered, as though to herself as much as to the storm, "I am still here. You are still here. And we are both learning." Her breath misted faintly over the rim, rippling the surface. The water responded with a tremor, and then slowly began to settle. The shadows faded first, the darkness lifting like veils from the miniature sea. The clouds thinned, breaking apart into wisps that drifted toward the edges of the cup. The waves, still restless, began to slow their rhythm, each crest softer, each fall less heavy. Lina felt the change mirrored within her. Her heartbeat softened, her shoulders dropped, and the worry that had pressed against her ribs ebbed away. The teacup was teaching her again, as it always seemed to do. Storms, even when fierce, always make room for stillness afterward. She sat for a long while, watching as the cup returned to calmness. The storm's memory lingered in the gentle ripples left behind, just as real storms leave seas uneven long after the winds are gone. And in her eyes, the reflection of this calm shimmered. It was not the bright, glassy peace of a perfectly still surface, but a deeper, calmed kind that comes after surviving something, after breathing through fear, after waiting for clouds to part. Her lips parted into a soft smile. It was not wide or showy. but tender, the kind of smile that carried the weight of experience and the quiet relief of knowing she had weathered something both within and beyond herself. In that moment, Lina felt both small and infinite again, as though she were no bigger than the teacup, and yet connected to something boundless, the very cycle of storms and calms, chaos and stillness that governed all life. The room around her was silent, touched only by the faint sigh of evening wind against the window. The storm in the cup had passed, and so had the storm in her heart. She sat with it, all the shadows, the chaos, the quiet hand knew she could hold them together without breaking. The teacup had shown her not only beauty, not only memory, but also resilience. And as she gazed once more into its depths, she saw her own reflection shimmering back at her eyes, steady, lips curved gently, carrying the quiet after the chaos. Seas of reflection. The teacup had calmed from its storm, its waters lying still, as though nothing had ever disturbed them. Lina sat quietly, her hands resting near the porcelain, her eyes tracing the delicate rim. It was late evening now, and the first hints of night began to touch the edges of the sky outside her window. She leaned forward slightly, curious, and what she saw upon the tea's surface made her breath catch softly in wonder. The tiny sea reflected the world above it. At first, it was only the lamp's gentle glow, golden and warm, spilling across the water in a trembling band of light. But as she shifted her gaze, she saw something stranger, deeper. The tea's surface was not merely a reflection of her room, it was a mirror to the sky beyond. Golden hues of sunset seemed to shimmer there, even though she had not looked outside. The clouds stretched across the miniature horizon, painted in soft streaks of orange and pink, as though the cup contained its own twilight. She leaned closer, and the illusion, or perhaps the truth, grew sharper. In that small circle of tea, she could see the heavens. The sun seemed to lower itself into the rim of the cup, its rays spreading like threads of silk across the liquid. Then, slowly, as if the cup moved through time faster than the world outside, silver moonlight appeared. The sun's warmth gave way to cool, pale beams that touched the water's skin like whispers. A single star flickered there, then two, then dozens, until the surface of the tea resembled the vast night sky. The tiny stars shone in delicate speckles, quivering softly each time she exhaled, and sent a ripple across the surface. Lina sat spellbound, her heart swelling with a quiet awe. How could something so small hold something so infinite? The teacup, fragile and ordinary in shape, contained sunsets, moonlight, and constellations. She felt as though she were staring into a paradoxa, microcosm reflecting the macrocosm. The vastness of the sky folded into a single sip of tea. It reminded her that the world was never entirely as it seemed, that even the smallest vessel, the smallest moment, could carry the weight of the cosmos. She placed her elbows gently on the table, and rested her chin against her palms, allowing herself to sink deeper into the vision. The stars in the tea winked at her as if they were aware of her watching. The golden glow of the sun shifted to silver, and she followed its rhythm as if the cup carried her through day and night within moments. The tea had become a map of time, a mirror of eternity. Each swirl seemed to shift the heavens themselves, as though she had been given the power to stir constellations with her fingertips. She reached out with one finger and gently touched the cup's edge. The liquid swirled, creating spirals of light that spun like galaxies being born. The stars elongated into trails, streaking into luminous arcs before settling once more into place. Lina smiled softly at the thought. She was a traveler now, a sailor of oceans that needed no boat, no compass, only a teacup. She imagined herself drifting across that small sea, lying on her back and staring at the mirrored sky. The thought filled her chest with both comfort and wonder, as though she were floating not in a fragile body, but in the boundless expanse of possibility. The golden sunset reminded her of evenings spent on hillsides, watching the sky blaze before fading into dusk. She remembered lying on grassy fields, tracing shapes in clouds as the sun sank lower. She remembered how silence often grew heavier during those moments, how the day's noise seemed to soften, as if the whole world paused to watch. That same silence now filled the room, the only sound, the soft rhythm of her breath. The tea was reminding her of all those quiet pauses in life, those instances when one could simply sit and witness something greater than themselves. Then came the moonlight, cool and soft, a silver companion that had always been there through the years. Lina had often watched the moon from her window as a child, whispering secrets to it, believing it listened. Sometimes, she thought, the moon had been the only presence she could confide in, the only witness to her dreams and fears. And now, here it was again, shimmering in her teacup, waiting for her gaze. She whispered once more, her voice tender, barely audible. "I see you." The words sent a tiny ripple across the tea, and the moonlight danced in reply. Her thoughts drifted toward the stars that glittered across the tea's surface. She had always loved their mystery, how each point of light was both impossibly far away and yet close enough to rest upon her eyes. She thought of how ancient they were, how their light had traveled across ages to reach her here, in this quiet room, in this tiny cup. And yet, here they were, appearing as if she could gather them with her fingertips. The stars seemed to remind her of the layers of time, the vast distances that still found ways to connect. She was both infinitely small and infinitely connected, and this duality filled her heart with an almost sacred calm as she gently swirled the cup. She imagined herself sailing across those mirrored oceans of sky. Each ripple was a wave, each star a distant lighthouse guiding her. The swirl turned into a slow spiral, and she let herself fall into it, as though her soul had stepped into a boat, drifting gently forward. She imagined traveling across sunsets and moonrises, watching the colors change endlessly, traveling without needing to leave her table. She was a wanderer of skies, contained within porcelain, a traveler who carried the world in her hands. Her breath deepened as she continued to gaze. She realized that mindfulness was not about emptying the mind entirely, but about noticing the golden glow of one moment, the cool silver of another, the stars that stitched silence into wonder. This teacup, in its delicate simplicity, had become her meditation, her mirror, her teacher. In its depths, she saw not only the heavens, but herself, how she moved through days and nights, how she shifted between light and shadow, how she carried universes within her own fragile form. She thought of how often she had overlooked such reflections in life, too caught in rushing, too lost in worries. And yet, here it was proof that stillness could hold more than any hurried moment. She could travel oceans without stepping outside, could witness galaxies without lifting her eyes to the sky, simply because she allowed herself to see. This realization filled her with quiet gratitude. The cup did not have to be extraordinary. It only had to be seen. The tea stilled again, and in its surface she saw herself reflected, not as she usually did in a mirror, not with details of flaws or features, but as a silhouette softened by starlight and moonglow. She was part of the scene, part of the cosmos folded into porcelain. For a long while, she simply watched, chin resting on her hands, eyes wide but softened by awe. Her heart beat slowly, like waves against a distant shore, and she felt absorbed, fully orderly by the beauty before her. She did not think of tomorrow, nor of yesterday. She did not think of tasks left undone, nor of storms already past. She thought only of this: the golden rays, the silver light, the tiny stars quivering on tea. She thought of how vastness and smallness coexisted, how infinity could fit into something she could hold, how her own thoughts could travel farther than her body ever could. She thought of how everything, no matter how big, could find a reflection in something small, and she realized, with a deep, quiet joy, that she too was part of this balance, small and infinite at once. The tea shimmered one last time, as though sighing with her, and she leaned a little closer, resting her chin more fully on her hands. The world seemed to fold into that single moment of reflection, her face softened by golden and silver light, her eyes carrying the glow of stars, her whole being absorbed into the gentle beauty of a teacup that mirrored the sky. She breathed out softly, her lips curving into a faint smile, utterly content to simply be. And there, in the stillness of her room, Lina lost herself to the quiet wonder of it all. Sipping infinity. The night had settled deep around Lina's window, wrapping the world in velvet quiet. The lamp on her table burned low, its glow softened into a warm, golden halo that clung to the edges of her teacup. For a long while, she simply sat there, her hands cradling the porcelain as though it were a fragile secret. The tea inside no longer shimmered with storms or galaxies. It lay, calm now, clear and still, as if resting after showing her so many wonders. And yet, even in its stillness, she felt that it contained more than she could ever truly name. She lifted the cup slowly, almost ceremonially, as if she were afraid that too quick a movement might break the spell. The rim touched her lips, warm and familiar. She took in the scent, first the faint herbal sweetness, the quiet earthiness beneath it. Then she tilted the cup, and the liquid touched her tongue. It was the same tea she had brewed earlier, nothing different in taste, and yet it filled her mouth as though it carried all the oceans she had witnessed. She felt the warmth spreading through her chest, felt it sinking deeper, as if each sip reached into places of her that were too often neglected. She closed her eyes and swallowed, her breath following the rhythm of the sip. That simple act, so ordinary, so easily overlooked on countless other days, became profound. She was not just drinking tea. She was sipping memories, whispers, storms, stars, and reflections. She was sipping infinity, folded gently into a mouthful of warmth. Her mind drifted back over the journey. She remembered the ripples she had first seen in the porcelain cup, tiny waves she had almost brushed off as chance. She thought of the whispers of waves she had heard, the voices of the sea calling from the most unexpected of places. She thought of the storm that had churned through her thoughts, and how she had breathed her way through it, learning that even tempests pass. She remembered the skies reflected in the tea's surface, the way sunsets and stars had swirled together, as though the universe itself had been caught in her hands. And now, here she was, taking it all in, sip by sip, carrying it within her. She smiled softly against the rim of the cup. How many times had she made tea without noticing? How many mornings had she rushed through the ritual, pouring water, adding leaves, stirring, and sipping without seeing the worlds that rested quietly in her hands? Tonight, she realized, was different, not because the tea itself had changed, but because she had. She had chosen to see. She had chosen to lean closer, to listen, to imagine, and in doing so, the ordinary had become extraordinary. She placed the cup down gently, letting her fingertips linger against the porcelain as if to thank it. The surface of the tea quivered slightly, still holding its mirrored sky. She gazed into it, her reflection faint against the backdrop of imagined stars. For a moment, she felt as though she were both herself and not herself at all, though her small life and the boundless universe had blended together into something seamless. Her breath slowed, deepened, grew calm. She felt as though she were standing at the edge of a vast sea, her feet in the sand, waves lapping softly at her toes. Yet she was also here, safe in her room, grounded by the simple act of tea. Both realities coexisted, and she understood that perhaps this was the truest kind of magic, not escaping the world, but expanding it, finding infinity folded into the folds of daily life. She lifted the cup once more, taking another sip, slower this time, letting the warmth bloom fully. She thought of her family, of seaside laughter, of childhood games on sandy shores. She thought of the storms she had weathered, the moments of worry and doubt that had once seemed larger than she could bear. She thought of the calm skies that had followed, the stars that had guided her silently through long nights. She realized that all of it, every memory, every challenge, every fleeting joy, was contained in her now, just as the cup had held oceans and skies. A soft gratitude welled within her. She whispered into the quiet, "Thank you." She wasn't sure who she addressed the tea, the cup, the universe, herself, but the words felt right, like an offering back to the silence that had given her so much tonight. Her hands felt lighter as she lowered the cup, now nearly empty. She tilted it slightly, watching the last remnants swirl. It struck her then that endings did not mean emptiness. The tea would be gone soon, but the worlds it had shown her remained. They were inside her now, woven into her breath, her thoughts, her heartbeat. This ritual, as small as it seemed, had filled her with something she could not lose. She rested her chin against her hands again, her gaze drifting toward the window. The night outside stretched endlessly, a dark canvas dotted with faint stars. Yet, even as she looked outward, she saw echoes of the same sky in the tea before her. It was as though the two had merged, the outer universe and the one in her cup, until she could no longer separate them. Her eyes softened, reflecting both the stars outside and the imaginary ocean still dancing faintly on the tea's surface. For the first time in a long while, she felt no need to ask for more, no need to reach beyond what she had. The teacup, simple and unassuming, had offered her infinity. And infinity, she realized, was not some unreachable distance, but something that could be found in the folds of everyday life. The extraordinary was not elsewhere, it was here, in porcelain, in breath, in awareness. A calm peace washed over her as she leaned back slightly, her body sinking into the quiet. She could face tomorrow now, whether it brought storms or calm seas. She could drift into sleep now, knowing that dreams would carry her across oceans she had already glimpsed. It didn't matter which came first, day or night, because she carried infinity with her. Either way, the cup sat empty, yet full. The room sat quiet, yet vast. And Lina herself sat between them, smiling faintly, her eyes reflecting a small ocean no one else could see. She lifted her gaze to the stars outside the window and held it there, breathing softly, content in her eyes. Just for an instant, the ocean danced. As Lina takes her final, careful sip, she feels the vastness of the ocean contained within her little teacup, carrying stories, whispers, and quiet wonders. She sets the cup down, smiling softly, feeling peace fill her heart. Now, let yourself, too, sink into this calm, carrying it gently into your night. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember to subscribe to Whispers of the Night for more stories that guide you softly into sleep.